Are you having a hard time figuring out what to get Dad for Father's Day? You should check out Row 1 Brand's Vintage Pictorum Gallery. They have America's best sports art. With over 7,200 historic sports prints, you're assured to find something unique for Dad this Father's Day. Instead of a boring old tie, get him a historic baseball photo taken by Henry High Sandom at the historic Polo Grounds Stadium in New York City during the 1894 Temple Cup. Or, if he's an NFL buff, check out the 1963 vintage NFL poster. These are so good looking that you'll be amazed how they turn out. Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1 and save 15% off your order.
This is Basketball History 101 with Rick Loayza.
Welcome back to Basketball History 101, part of the Sports History Network. I am your host, Rick Loayza, and this is the podcast where we bring to life some of the forgotten stories from basketball history. And today, we are going to share the story of the first NBA merger. Most fans of the NBA and NBA history are familiar with the NBA-ABA merger, and I've talked about it on this show as part of episode 29, in case you want to go back and check that out. I go in depth in that episode on how the old ABA and the NBA decided to merge into a single league under the NBA name back in 1976. But today, I am going to talk about the first merger that the NBA was a part of, which directly led to the name NBA. When you study the history of how the NBA got started, there are a few times when they could have failed. Professional basketball was not as popular back then as it is today. In the mid-1940s, when the NBA started, its popularity was less than football, baseball, hockey, boxing, and horse racing. More people could name the winner of the Kentucky Derby and who the heavyweight champion was than even name the team from their own city. The NBA was fighting an uphill battle for attention and ticket sales. It was not a given that the league would survive and thrive as the top basketball league in the whole world as it is today. If not for some key decisions at important moments, the league would not be here today. This is the story we are sharing. So in order to tell this story properly, I need to take you back to the year 1946. This was the summer that the NBA organized, with play to begin in the fall of that year. For its first 3 seasons, the league went by the initials BAA, the Basketball Association of America. For that very first season, they had 11 teams signed up in mostly large eastern cities. Here are the names of the 11 teams that played during that very first year. Only 3 of them are still playing today. In the Western Division, we had the Chicago Stags, St. Louis Bombers, Cleveland Rebels, Detroit Falcons, and Pittsburgh Ironmen. Every one of these teams went out of business at some point in the early history of the league. In the Eastern Division, we had the Washington Capitals, Philadelphia Warriors, New York Knicks, Providence Steamrollers, Boston Celtics, and Toronto Huskies, the only Canadian team that first year. The Warriors, Knicks, and Celtics are the only 3 teams still playing today from that very first season. The BAA struggled for solid financial footing. They had teams in some very large cities, and they counted Madison Square Garden in New York and the Boston Garden as 2 of the league's arenas, and they were 2 of the most prestigious arenas in the country. But they began to lose money quickly. Professional basketball just was not that popular, at least not in the late 1940s, as I mentioned. At the same time, there was another major professional league already operating, mostly in the Midwest, but they were operating to modest success. And when I say success, I mean that they were not losing money, at least not all of them. Remember, in the 1940s, nobody was getting rich in professional basketball, not the owners, and certainly not the players. Back then, if you had a college degree, you could make more money working in a corporate office than running up and down a basketball court for a paycheck. And for many players back then, that's exactly what they did. I'll just give you one example. Back then, there was a player named Bob Kurland who played his college ball at Oklahoma A&M University and won 2 NCAA titles. He was a rival to George Mikan. Kurland was a gifted 7-footer with athleticism and skill. Anybody would have gladly taken him to be part of their team. But Kurland realized that he could make more money by taking a corporate job with Phillips Oil and then playing for the company-sponsored AAU team as an amateur on the weekends. This allowed him to make more money than a professional basketball player, and it allowed him to play on the Olympic team a couple of times in 1948 and 1952, since he was being paid as a salesman for Phillips Oil and not as a basketball player. Now, back to this other league that was playing in the Midwest. They were called the NBL, the National Basketball League, and they operated in small to medium-sized cities. And this was a great strategy for them. They played in towns where there were very few other entertainment options, which led to a lot of fan support since there was not much else to do without driving a really long way. I give these guys a lot of credit for that strategy. Here are some of the teams that played in the NBL. Now, this is not a comprehensive list. This is just some of the names that stuck out to me. You might even recognize a few of them. The Akron Wingfoots, Anderson Packers, Tri-Cities Blackhawks, Chicago American Gears, Dayton Metropolitans, Fort Wayne Zollner Pistons, Indianapolis Kotskis, John Wooden played for that team, Minneapolis Lakers, Oshkosh All-Stars, Rochester Royals, Syracuse Nationals, and Waterloo Hawks. When the BAA announced itself as a new league, it put a scare in the NBL. The two leagues only overlapped in one city. They both had a team in Chicago, but other than that, they played in completely separate cities. So it wasn't like they were competing for the same fans. But what they were competing for were the players. The first player that brought this into sharp focus was Hall of Famer Dolph Schayes. When he came out of New York University, he was being pursued by both the New York Knicks of the BAA and the Syracuse Nationals of the NBL. Schayes asked the Knicks for more money than they could afford under the salary cap. So when the Knicks refused, Schayes signed with the Syracuse Nationals since the NBL had no salary cap. And this was a big loss for the BAA. The BAA was desperate to have either some of the NBL players switch to their league or have entire teams switch to their league. Either option would bring in new revenue streams. But something needed to be done because otherwise the BAA was not going to survive. Despite the fact that they were operating in mostly big cities with lots of potential fans, the BAA had lost $500,000 in each of their first two seasons. After that first season with the 11 teams, 4 of them went out of business, so they had to add a new team just to keep it even with an 8-team league for season number 2. But everyone knew that this was not sustainable. This led to a secret meeting between the president of the BAA, Maurice Podoloff, and the owner of the NBL's Fort Wayne Zollner Pistons, Fred Zollner. The Pistons were probably the most financially secure team in the NBL. They were popular, they won lots of games, and they had a very strong fan base in northeastern Indiana. Podoloff flew to Indiana for this secret meeting at Zollner's house. Nobody could know this meeting was taking place, or else the other NBL owners would erupt in anger. Podoloff presented Zollner with a plan to have the Pistons switch leagues and join the BAA. Zollner didn't need the BAA as much as the BAA needed Zollner. But Zollner really liked the idea of seeing his team's name on the marquee of the world-famous Madison Square Garden. Podoloff also inquired about Zollner's opinion of other NBL teams switching leagues, particularly the Minneapolis Lakers and their superstar George Mikan. The BAA really wanted Mikan in their league since he was a player who sold tickets. In terms of marketing and ticket sales, Mikan was the Michael Jordan of his day. He was the kind of player that every basketball fan wanted to see. So after a bit of negotiating, Zollner agreed and the Pistons signed on to join the BAA for the 1948-49 season. And that was the first domino to fall. Very quickly, the Indianapolis Kotskis also decided to switch leagues. Podoloff's next target was the Minneapolis Lakers and George Mikan. But they were happy where they were, and initially told Podoloff that the Lakers would stay put in the NBL. After all, the Lakers had just won the NBL championship and felt really good about their current situation. The Lakers leadership was also concerned with being sued if they switched, and decided they did not need the extra drama. The third team? Well, that was a little different. The Rochester Royals contacted Podoloff and asked if there was room for them to join the BAA. Podoloff wasn't sure at first because Rochester was a small city in the state of New York where the Knicks were already playing. But back then Rochester was a 10-hour drive from New York City, so Podoloff agreed and the Royals were the third NBL team to switch to the BAA. And once the news spread that these three NBL teams were switching leagues, the Lakers changed their mind, recognizing that the future of professional basketball was now in the BAA, and they better join up. So now 4 teams had decided to switch leagues. The BAA had a press conference on May 10th, 1948 to announce the new league realignment. The NBL threw a fit at the idea of losing some of their best teams to the other league. So as you can imagine, they threatened to begin filing a series of lawsuits against the BAA for taking 4 of their teams. The BAA now had to figure out what to do if the NBL began filing those lawsuits. However, in the meantime, both leagues needed to play some basketball, or else nobody was going to make any money at all. So for the 1948-49 season, the BAA increased from 8 teams to 12 teams, with 3 of the 4 new teams being financially stable. It added a new level of stability to the entire league that was only just 3 years old. Had these 4 teams not switched leagues when they did, it is very possible that neither league would survive long term. It turned out to be the best thing for both leagues. But this is not the merger yet that I promised to tell you about. This is just 4 teams switching leagues. Both leagues operated separately that following season. It is a year later that the merger actually happens, and I'll share the rest of that story right after this.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Welcome back to the show, and let us keep going with the story of the first NBA merger. 4 NBL teams have just switched leagues and joined the BAA, and there was an adjustment period for those NBL players coming into the new league. Mikan explained that he had to start pacing himself. The NBL played only 10-minute quarters, but the BAA played 12-minute quarters. Those extra 8 minutes of game action could put a toll on a guy like Mikan, who was used to playing the entire game on a regular basis. But the Lakers and Mikan figured things out as the Lakers won the 1948-49 BAA championship, their first year in the new league. They definitely made a splash. However, back in the NBL, they struggled through that season with 4 of their best teams gone. The Waterloo Hawks and the Denver Nuggets went out of business before the season even finished. By the way, these were a completely different Denver Nuggets than the team that plays today. The rest of the league was barely hanging on. The NBL's threats to sue the BAA became real. So Podoloff spoke with the other BAA owners and came up with an amazing solution. He sold them on the idea of allowing any NBL team that wanted to join the BAA for the upcoming 1949-1950 season, in exchange for them dropping all lawsuits. Joining the BAA is what all those NBL teams at this point really wanted anyway, so they made a deal. Also, Podoloff argued privately that most of these teams would probably go out of business after only 1 year anyway, leaving nobody to sue them. It was a very creative solution, so the 2 leagues would officially be merging into a single league under the BAA's leadership. And to honor this new agreement of the 2 leagues, they decided to change the name of the new league to incorporate elements of both of the old names. Instead of the Basketball Association of America or the National Basketball League, they settled on the name National Basketball Association, or NBA. While all of this negotiating was happening, the BAA's Providence Steamrollers and the Indianapolis Jets went out of business and would not be returning to the new league. However, 7 NBL teams joined the new merged league, bringing the newly christened NBA to 17 teams. The 7 teams that joined were the Syracuse Nationals, who are now the Philadelphia 76ers, a brand new and different Indianapolis team called the Olympians, the Anderson Packers, the Tri-Cities Blackhawks, who now play as the Atlanta Hawks, the Sheboygan Redskins, the Waterloo Hawks, and a resuscitated Denver Nuggets. Again, no relation to the current Denver Nuggets. Only 2 of these 7, the 76ers and the Hawks, are still in the NBA. The largest gain to the new formation of the league was that they could market themselves in more cities, and they were no longer competing for college players and free agents. As the only national level professional league, they could work together to create a draft and put into place rules around how free agents would be signed. I also want to clarify something here in regard to how records and games were kept. Since the NBA's history and leadership started with the BAA, the current NBA includes all records from those first 3 seasons as the BAA in the NBA totals. That means that championships, points, wins, losses, and all other statistics from the BAA are still valid as NBA totals. All records from the old NBL are not included. For example, the Lakers won the 1948 NBL championship, but it is not included in their total of 17 NBA championships as of the completion of the 2020 season. And all of those points that Mikan and Dolph Schayes scored in the old league do not count for their NBA totals. The same thing happened with the NBA when they merged with the ABA under the NBA leadership in 1976. All of those points that Dr. J scored in the ABA do not count in his NBA totals. If they did count, then Dr. J would be the number 8 scorer of all time. But since those ABA points do not count, Dr. J is considered only the number 72 scorer in NBA history. But that, in a nutshell, is how the NBA navigated their first merger and became known as the NBA. If not for Podolov's creative solution to their competition with the NBL, the league may not exist today. The 2 leagues became stronger together than they were apart. The strong leadership of Maurice Podolov in making sure that the NBA would survive and begin to thrive is honored by the current NBA. The player that wins the MVP award in the NBA is presented with the Maurice Podolov Trophy, and that is very fitting. In fact, Podolov served as the commissioner of the NBA from its founding as the BAA in 1946 until his retirement in 1963. By the time he left the NBA, every single player was a full-time professional. None of the players needed to have summer jobs to make ends meet, like they did in the beginning. And Podolov lived long enough to see Michael Jordan's rookie season and the beginning of multi-million-dollar per year salaries. Just to show you how much things had changed during the life of Maurice Podolov, at the time that he died in 1985, Magic Johnson was the highest paid NBA player at $2.5 million per year. During that very first season, way back in 1946 and 1947, the entire league, all 110 players combined, only made $550,000. The NBA is now truly a major American sports league. Actually, it is a major global sports league in that it attracts the best players in the entire world into a single league. No other global sport does that. Even in soccer or international football, there are 5 leagues that sit at the top of the mountain. The Premier League from England, La Liga from Spain, Ligue 1 from France, Serie A from Italy, and the Bundesliga from Germany. The world's greatest international football players are spread out over 5 leagues. But in basketball, all of the world's greatest players play in one league. A full 1/3 of the NBA, that's over 150 players, come from outside of the United States. In fact, the NBA's MVP award, again, the Maurice Podolov Trophy, has been won by a non-American 7 times, including the last 3 awards in a row as of this episode. Those players are Akeem Olajuwon, who was still a Nigerian citizen at the time he won it, Steve Nash of Canada twice, Dirk Nowitzki of Germany, Giannis Antetokounmpo from Greece twice, and Nikola Jokic from Serbia just a couple of weeks ago. Not bad for a league who spent nearly the first decade just trying to survive. Now, credit for that first merger goes to Maurice Podolov, the NBA's first commissioner. So, that's it for today. Join us next time when we talk about the 1936 Olympics, the first one where basketball was a full medal sport. A total of 21 nations arrived in Berlin to fight for the gold medal, but only one team came home with basketball gold. That's next time on Basketball History 101, part of the Sports History Network, the headquarters of Sports Yesteryear. Go to sportshistorynetwork.com to find out more about this and other sports history podcasts. If you like what you hear, please hit that subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts. Also, go ahead and give us a rating and a review, and that will help others to find this podcast more easily. And check out our page on Facebook. It's called Basketball History 101 Podcast. There, you will find shorter historical posts as well as comments and discussion starters on today's game. I'll also announce there when new episodes come out. I want to thank my producer and editor, Jacob Loayza. Join us each week as we continue to mine the history of basketball for more great stories from the past. Take care, and see you soon.
We here at the Sports History Network proudly partner with 26 podcasts, all revolving around the history of sports. But did you know that many of our hosts were sports history authors way before they started their shows? It's true. We've got Joe Ziemba, host of When Football Was Football, Joe Zagurski, host of Pro Football in the 1970s, Mark Morthier, host of Yesterday Sports, Tommy Phillips, host of Lombardi Memories, and Scott Adamson, co-host of From the 55-Yard Line. All these authors have many books for you to choose from. To check them out, go to our website at sportshistorynetwork.com/sportshistorybooks. Pick up your copy today. Soundtrack provided by Kevin MacLeod of filmmusic.io.